Okay, well, welcome back everyone. Today's video is a video dedicated to the topic of a dividend. And we're going to begin by just defining what a dividend is, and then we'll explore a little bit more about how they really work. And so a dividend really is nothing more than a distribution of earnings. So distribution of earnings to shareholders. Now that's very simple, and there's a little more complications as you get into it, but that's basically what it is. It's a distribution by a company of its earnings to shareholders. Okay, well, what does that all mean? Well, let's remember that a company is made up of two primary financial statements. On the one hand, we have the balance sheet, and then we also have an income statement. Okay, now remember, and there are separate videos on both balance sheets and income statements, so if this looks new to you, you might want to go check those out. But I'll just assume for now that you've had a chance to watch those. Now, you'll remember that in a balance sheet, what you have over here are assets. Here are liabilities. And here is equity. And you'll remember also that shareholders fall down in this category. So shareholders own part of the equity of the company. Then down here is the balance, or is the income statement, and the top part of the income statement is income or revenue, and the bottom part is expenses. And of course, the bottom line, which I don't draw, but if there's any money left over after you subtract expenses from income, is you have profit or earnings. Okay, and so it's from this pot right here, it's from this pool right here that a company may choose to pay a dividend to its shareholders. And that's one of the ways that a shareholder can make money by purchasing a stock, is to be paid dividends. Of course, the other form of return that a shareholder may get is just an increase in the price of their stock. That's typically a capital gain if the price goes up, or dividends. So those are really the two ways that a shareholder benefits by owning shares of the company. Now, it's important to notice, it's important to know that dividends are optional. And what I mean by that is a shareholder has no right. A shareholder cannot force a company to distribute some of its earnings. That decision lies in the hands of the board of directors, which of course are elected by the shareholders. So control over dividend decision and amount belong to the board of directors. So the board may decide, they may look at the financials and say, yep, things are going pretty well. We're going to have enough cash left over to take care of any expansion needs that we may have, or other needs for cash. And so they may declare a dividend. That's kind of the term that you normally hear. They may declare a dividend. And when you see someone declare a dividend, or you see a company declare a dividend, they're doing so on a per share basis. So you may see a company declare a dividend of $1.50 per share. Okay, and so for a shareholder who has 100 shares, they would then receive a dividend check of 100 shares times $1.50, right, or $150 worth of dividends. Now there are different ways that a shareholder might receive a dividend. You can actually receive dividends. Here I showed that it's in the form of cash. So cash is one option. You can also get a dividend in the form of additional stock. So instead of getting $1.50, you just might get $1.50 worth of new shares. So at the end of the day, instead of having 100 shares, you'd have some other amount of shares depending on what the stock was trading at. So you'd have your 100 original shares plus the new shares from the dividend. And those are the two most common ones. In extremely rare cases, you might get a dividend in the form of products or property, but that's pretty rare. So cash or stock are the two most common forms of dividend payment. Typically, dividends are paid quarterly. Not always, but that's pretty typical. Quarterly payments. All right, and it's based on the number of shares that you own. Whenever the company decides to kind of draw that line in the sand. And so in some cases you'll hear a phrase called an ex-dividend date. And that's the date that, in essence, the corporate books are frozen for a moment in time. They figure out who's on the list, who were the shareholders that are entitled to those dividends, and then and the number of shares owned on that particular date. And that's the date that the whole distribution of the dividend is based on. Now, one last important thing to know before we sign off on this particular lesson is who pays dividends. And what I mean by that is some companies don't even pay a dividend. There are many companies, many don't pay. And why is that? Well, a lot of these companies need cash for growth. They need their cash to grow their business. And so what you typically see is older, mature companies, mature, and I'll even say large companies, although that's not always the case, are more likely to pay a dividend. Smaller growth companies, tend not to pay dividends. And again, that's because these smaller companies that are just getting started, they're really trying to preserve cash and use the cash to grow the business, where larger companies are established and they're spending off enough money, more money than they need to pay their bills and to grow and expand. And so they are more likely to pay a dividend. So, one thing to do is to go look at the Fortune, go look at a list of the Fortune 500 or even the Fortune 1000. And I have not done this recently, but my suspicion is that a good number of those Fortune 500 companies are paying some form of a dividend. Now, that may have changed recently over the last couple of years as the economy's been tougher. The companies are either reducing or eliminating their dividend. But I think especially if you go back 3 or 4 years, you'll find that a good number of these Fortune 500 companies are dividend-paying companies. So, okay, well, that's a quick tour of dividends, and we'll have some more videos on some other things like dividend yield and dividend reinvestment plans. So keep checking back for some of those more detailed videos. We'll see you later. Thanks.